Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. This is everything you need to know in order to have a successful application. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is your premier destination for personal finance, investing, real estate with your host, Danish. The federal government has released additional background details into the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy program back in November. So let's dig into the details. First, it takes landlords right out of the process, delivering aid directly to small business owners. The CERS predecessor, the Canada Emergency Commercial Rental Assistance Program, was widely criticized because it relied on buy-ins from landlords, many of which did not even participate in the program. The new program takes this problem directly out of the equation, putting money immediately into the hands of businesses who need the support. Unlike Cecra, there is no maximum threshold which disqualifies larger tenants from the program, and tenants who have expenses that exceed the cap amounts set by the CERS program will still be eligible. As of early October, the Government of Canada has delivered $1.8 billion in rent support through the Cecra for Small Business program. This rent assistance has helped over 130,000 small businesses across the country, supporting close to 1.2 million jobs in Canada. The new subsidy will be available retroactive to September 27, 2020 until June 2021. The government is providing proposed details for the first 12 weeks of the program until December 19, 2020. The government may change the rent subsidy rates after that date as circumstances surrounding our economic recovery change, as well as the change in the spread of COVID-19. The CERS program will be handled by the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA. The maximum base rate rent subsidy will be 65% and available to organizations with a revenue drop of 70% or more compared to a reference period. The base rate would then drop to 40% for organizations experiencing a revenue drop of 50%. And then would gradually decrease to zero for organizations not experiencing a revenue decline. In other words, if you have experienced a revenue drop of 70% or more, you would be entitled to a maximum subsidy payment of $48,750, which you get by multiplying the maximum subsidy rate of 65% against the maximum cap rate of $75,000. This amount is per property per qualifying period. And if you're a part of a group of companies and its affiliates, you will be entitled to a maximum rent subsidy payment of $195,000, which is a maximum $300,000 for groups multiplied by the same 65% rate. Again, this is per qualifying period for all your properties. Here's a chart provided by the Government of Canada, and you can see, based on your revenue decline, there is a formula to calculate your rent subsidy. There are three buckets: revenue declines of 1% to 49%, 50% to 69%, and the last bucket being 70% or more. This is an important point. While the subsidy will be available retroactively to cover October rents, it may be several more weeks before small businesses are actually able to access the program. Rents from April to September were subsidized under the old Cecra program through the landlords. Certain news outlets are reporting that you may not actually get to receive the cash for the CERS subsidy until sometime December. The longer the government takes in delivering the cash to businesses in need, many will have to make tough decisions until that point. Every day that goes by without the program being in place, there will be more and more businesses making tough decisions to permanently close their doors. This is unfortunate, as small businesses have been known to be great contributors to the overall economy. I've had the opportunity to work with many small businesses, so this really hits home. The program would cover eligible fixed property expenses, including rent and interest on commercial mortgages. The amount of subsidy would depend on the revenue losses suffered. Let's look at the revenue test for the program. Organizations are able to calculate their drop in revenues in one of two ways, but the basis of this calculation must remain the same for each of the 3 qualifying periods, which I will show you later in the video. The first approach for determining revenue decline is to compare your organization's monthly revenue on a year-over-year basis for the applicable calendar month. For example, if you're applying for the first qualifying period, which is October 2020, you would compare your revenue to October 2019 and see how the revenue levels compare. The second approach is to compare your organization's qualifying month's revenues against the average of January and February of 2020. Organizations are required to use the same approach in calculating revenue decline in order to determine the available support. The approach chosen would then apply to both the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy Program, which means you can't use one approach one month and then switch up the approach the next month. It must be the same for every period you're applying for support under the subsidy program. Now let's look at the qualifying rent expenses for commercial tenants. Gross rent, rent based on a percentage of sales, profit, or other similar criteria. Amounts required to be paid under a triple net lease as regular installments of operating expenses, property taxes, and ancillary services. The qualifying rental amount must be reduced by amounts received from subletting the property. Now let's look at what amounts are excluded from the calculation of qualifying rent. Sales taxes like GST, HST, PST, amounts paid under a security, guarantee, or covenant, payments arising due to default under the agreement by the eligible entity, interest and penalties on unpaid amounts, fees payable for discrete amounts or special services, and common area maintenance, reconciliation, adjustment payments. Expenses for each qualifying period will be capped at $75,000 per location and be subject to an overall cap of $300,000 that will be shared among affiliated entities. The CERS program will also provide a top-up for lockdown support of 25% for businesses that must shut their doors or significantly reduce their activities due to a public health order. This would then raise the maximum subsidy to 90% from the 65%. This is a snapshot of the next 3 qualifying periods that the government is planning. And after December 19th, 2020, these parameters may change. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you'll be the first to know if and when there are any changes to the program. The CERS program has made improvements over the predecessor Cecra program, but it still has its shortfalls. This new program requires tenants to pay rent before being able to apply to the CERS program. And this may be very difficult for tenants who do not have the cash flow to do so. The other thing, eligible applicants will only receive a subsidy that covers a portion of their eligible expenses, as this is not meant to subsidize 100% of your rent expenses. If you are eligible for the subsidy, you'll be required to apply to the CRA by no later than 180 days after the end of the applicable qualifying period. So make sure you jump on the applications right away as soon as the process opens up. Let's look at some examples to see how the program works. Let's say you own a kitchen supply store. Your store was closed in the initial stages of the pandemic in March and April, but has since opened back up. With the new safety precautions in place, you have to limit the number of customers allowed in the store. In September and October, your revenues are down 25% compared to the same period last year. You paid $5,000 in eligible rent costs during the first period of the rent subsidy program. To calculate your potential subsidy, you would take the 25% drop in revenue, multiply this by 0.8 per the government guidelines, which gives you a rental subsidy rate of 20%. Multiply this by $5,000, and you will be eligible for a subsidy of $1,000. This effectively cuts your rent expense from $5,000 to $4,000 for the period. Example number 2. You own a local chain of 3 casual dining restaurants. With restrictions on dining room capacity and due to the cold weather, you're unable to operate your patios. Your revenues are down 40% in September and 60% for October compared to the same period last year. You paid $30,000 in eligible rent costs for the first period under the subsidy, which in this case would be October. To calculate your potential subsidy, you would take the 60% drop in revenues, subtract 50% per the government calculation, and multiply this by a factor of 1.25. This gives you 12.5%. Now add the 40% base subsidy rate, which gives you a rental subsidy rate of 52.5%. Multiply this by the $30,000 in rent you paid, and you'll be eligible for a subsidy of $15,750. This effectively cuts your rent expense from $30,000 to $14,250 for the period. Last example, example 3. Let's look at how the subsidy would apply to a corporate group which is comprised of a chain of 6 cinemas. The group fully owns each cinema and they are all incorporated separately. In September, revenues were down 70% compared to last year, and in October, revenues are down 80% on a year-over-year basis. The group had a total rent expense of $600,000 in October, which is the first qualifying period under the subsidy. To calculate the potential subsidy with an 80% revenue drop year-over-year, the group would be eligible for the maximum subsidy rate of 65% on the maximum $300,000 rental expense limit for a group. In theory, you can take the $300,000 limit and divide among the 6 cinemas, and each location would be eligible to claim $50,000 in rent expenses. The total group subsidy will be $195,000, which is 65% multiplied by $300,000. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you've hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know your thoughts on the new rental subsidy program in the comments below. Catch you guys in the next one.